Welcome to The Beat. This is the podcast where we talk about building equity, accountability, and trust with law enforcement. My name is Dr. Lori Hall, and today I'm joined with two guests. If you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Christian. I'm a senior studying criminology. It's my last year, so I'm excited.
Awesome.
And I'm Dr. Dawn Cecil, criminology professor.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining me. Today, we're going to be talking about media, social media, and policing. So, as we begin, I want to kind of make a distinction between media and social media. So, kind of viewers understand what we're talking about when we say media. So, when we're referring to media, we're referring to the public news outlets that you see, on television, whether that's Fox or CNN or whatever outlet that you watch. When we talk about social media, we're talking about the ways that individuals go about sharing content, whether that be their views or their opinions, whatever it may be, on social media platforms.
Mhm.
So those are the kind of the distinctions between those two. So within the context of policing, these two things, media and social media, have a huge influence. They influence a lot of things with regard to policing, like perceptions, narratives, public trust, right? And we've seen a lot of growth with social media having a greater and greater impact as it, has kind of become this age of social media. Thinking back into the past, like in the ways that media has kind of influenced policing, what do you think are some of the I guess the ways that media has been used with regards to policing, whether that be, like reporting on crime or reporting on police activity? Can you think about ways that it's been utilized?
I mean, it's definitely been shown, like, I don't know, they can really just highlight specific events and kind of form a narrative or the public's perception because that's all they're seeing. And so when that's kind of all you're seeing, regardless of the statistics, whether something's happening more or less, it can kind of shape and skew people's
Yeah.
narratives.
And I think when I think back on like the way that the media has been used to kind of push whatever agenda, right, that they have, it's often like a one-dimensional thing. And I think that as we've progressed, we're getting a lot more dimension added to the way that we kind of come to understand events. But there's still slants to those things.
Yeah, I think it's just like the availability. Like earlier on, like decades ago, you didn't have like all video and like all these different angles of things happening. You just saw like a headline and like basic
Yeah.
reporting about it. But now we see pretty much everything.
Yeah, and I think that like with the fact that we have the internet, that has changed things too.
Mhm.
Because in the past, when you wanted to consume news, or you didn't have a lot of option, and you didn't have a way to go about like cross-referencing or checking or whatever, you had to rely on whatever was there, right? It was just, I think, what, 4, 7, and 11, that was kind of your choice.
Exactly.
And now you can view many different outlets. You can get on the internet and see all these other accounts from different media sources. And so I definitely think that that's changed a lot. Our availability or access has greatly increased. But social media has kind of changed the way that media presents information too, but also the information that we're getting. When I think about social media and its influence on policing, the thing that I find the most problematic is the distortions, right? And I also think that it highlights a lot of the issues that people have been talking about for a very long time, that we weren't hearing from the media, right? Because the media has a very like specific agenda, I guess you could say, you know? Um, do you like consume news on social media or
I mean, I feel like I've tried to like stay away from like TikTok news and like Instagram news, just because I feel like it's always like so far off in any one direction. It's kind of hard to trust. But I mean, I see things like here and there.
What are your thoughts about it when you're consuming it? Like, do you take it for what it is, or do you have like the critique?
I feel like because stuff like that's gotten so much more exposure, I've kind of become like numb to it.
Mm,
I don't know. It's like you see so many stories about like shootings and like all this stuff happening. It's like you don't really think of it the same.
yeah. I had Chief Holloway on a couple of episodes ago, and one of the critiques that he had with media specifically was that they put information out too soon before they have like the full story.
People
You
take it
know?
like as fact. Like that's
Yeah.
like what happened.
Yeah, or like they want him to give them information, and he's like, like I'm still in the process of like doing the investigation, and like but they want that. And so then they put it out, and then facts change, things change. And he said, like he wishes they would kind of like slow down and like let us get everything together. And he says that it has negative impacts, because when the media presents a story and then facts change later on, they see it as a failing of law enforcement more than, a presumption of media.
Mhm.
And so I tend to agree, like they're always like right now, like we want to get this story out. How do you think that media influences the narratives about policing?
It depends on what type of media you are talking about. If it's just news media, it's first of all, they're going to get most of their stories about crime from law enforcement. They've done it from the very first printed news
Mm.
stories about crime and justice. They always went to either the courts or the police, and that's where they get their information. So they still do that, right? And so the narrative is always going to come in traditional media from that official stance. And I think about cases in which violence is used against citizens, right? The very first people they're going to get this information is the police. And the police sources, experts, etc., become the prominent driver of that narrative in the news. Versus maybe, and I'm thinking about a study I personally did of the coverage of Breonna Taylor's shooting in the
Mhm.
news. And it was dominated by the police department and other representatives from the city, as opposed to Breonna's family, people who knew her, things like that. So that prominent narrative is the official one, where the other side of the story, because there's always the other side of the story, is sort of quieted in the traditional sort of news coverage of these things. It's, you have to turn to things like, at the time, Twitter, because they had Black Twitter. And Black Twitter was known as basically having a community journalism kind of feel, that anyone with the phone could put their version of the story out there. And so this became this alternative way of driving that narrative. I think it's changed since Twitter became X, but that was sort of the way they could combat it. But the traditional news media itself is always, not always going to side, but going to predominantly come from the view of law enforcement, because that's their sources.
Mm. Yeah, and that's interesting because, hearing from Chief Holloway, he's saying like we don't have all the facts, but they want all the information right away. And so that really kind of highlights the variations or the differences of the flow of that narrative as it progresses and they have more information and how it changes. And then you mention like the other side of the story, right? And I think that that's where kind of social media has really helped, like you were mentioning with Twitter and X, to really tell that other side. And I think that largely the public has difficulty, in my opinion, like reconciling with the two narratives. And it creates a lot of outcry, right? Because like you're getting that official, like you're saying, from the media, right? That's coming from law enforcement. Like, these are the facts. This is what happened. And then the family and the victims and all of these other individuals, maybe witnesses, the community, are saying, here's our side. And there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that are missing, right? There's parts of the story that don't line up, and there's, facts that don't make sense. And so people struggle with saying these are two stories that absolutely happened and these narratives are both valid. We just have, discrepancies because there's two sides, right? And I think that that's kind of like a lot of the fuel for like the outcry of people and the anger that they have because these narratives don't line up. And I think a lot of it is, law enforcement, they're used to like just these fact-based reports. Just here's the facts, right?
Mhm.
And it lacks really actual narrative, right? Like this is what happened. And so I think that there's that disjuncture that creates difficulties. Do you think there's a way to like remedy that?
To be quite honest, no, not with news,
Yeah.
right? Or even just news and social media, because both are, short attention span theater, so to
Right,
speak, right?
yeah.
Always has been. I mean, there's investigative journalism, which unfortunately, is harder to find nowadays. News agencies are not investing in investigative journalism the way that they used to. That's where then like podcasting will come in and things like that. But if you go for like just what news is, it's got to be quick,
Mhm.
right? And it's usually short. So it's going to give you really a pre-developed narrative because then you can fill in the rest. Like we can give you these same facts with every case and then you kind of fill in the rest of the information because I only have so much space or so much time to give you that. And so news itself is not going to be able to remedy that. I think really it's about the context, right? You're not getting all those contextual details. And even then social media, right? If that's your only way to give your side of the story, there's going to be some limitations to that as well. Like
Yeah.
you can't have I don't know how long, all the TikTok videos are, right? But you're still limited into how much information you can really give in some of those.
And most people don't want to spend the time. Like they hear
Yeah.
something on the news and then they'll go research every like angle and every perspective on the issue. Like they just take what they see at first glance and like that's
the
what they
story.
go
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
That's what happened. And then they spread that. They tell other people or they share it or whatever, and they don't look into it. So they're, anybody can share anything on social media. And I think that we're getting into a place where, people are taking it as fact and this
Yeah.
is real, and they're not taking into account all of the extraneous variables that are going on, like one, editing, right? And, just misinformation, right? And inaccurate facts, details, all like there's so much going on. And I think that the answer really is educating the public on how to consume
Media
these-
literacy.
media literacy. I
How-
like that.
How do you do that for like the population at large?
Oh yeah, I think that's the question of the day for I think anything,
Mhm.
because I think in a lot of our classes we talk about education, right? Education is like where we have to start, and that's difficult because you can try to educate people, but you have to. I mean, if you think about like elementary education or secondary education, trying to embed it in there, that's just another thing that we're adding to
Mhm.
already this long list of things that everyone else wants you to educate children on. Here, add this to the list. They need to learn this too. But then also, like we're talking about developing people, is that really the place, right? That we need to embed that. And I mean, I would argue that there's some element of media literacy that needs to be embedded early on. But as with any other education, I think it's a lifelong, ongoing thing. And I mean, I guess you could try to use social media to increase people's media literacy, but I mean, how do you ensure that you get that to everybody? I don't know.
Well, I
That's
feel like it's a
challenging.
broader life skill of one, it's the buzzword we're always saying, critical thinking,
Yeah.
but also just questioning things, being curious. Like as if
Yeah.
we could develop that, right? I think, I don't know, since, I don't have kids, don't have firsthand experience with what's going on in education, but from what little I do know, it's a little more in a box than it used to be. So maybe
sure.
it prevents that exploration and that questioning, or at least stifles it. Like, doesn't,
I would 100% agree that education as a system, as an institution, restricts learning, right? Like learning and education are two different things.
Mhm.
And the system that we've created is not conducive to learning, right? And we know that as educators, when we get students, that we have to really like get them out of the box
Mhm.
of, functioning in that system to get them to do critical thinking and to be focused on growth. And if you go back to and I think about like early Roman times, like learning was a very different thing than it is now. People would sit around and read and conversate, and
Yep.
that was like the central part of their lives, right? To grow and learn. And they didn't have a formalized education system, right? And it was open to anybody, but you had to want to do it, and we got a lot of great thinkers out of it because there's so much value, like I was saying in class today, of just conversating about an idea, right? To work through that and to think about it and to flesh out all of that to get to really a robust understanding of something. And we don't do that. We work on, let's just complete the goal. Here's the end
It's
product,
always
right?
the end goal, yeah.
And that's where we've gotten into our society. And I think that social media influences our ability to even engage with critical thinking as well, because we are getting so attached to short form video and
Addicted.
instantaneous that we're just like, I need more information. And we equate information gathering with knowledge consumption or knowledge or learning or growth. And those are different things, right? Like the relaying of facts is not a sign or an indicator that you are somehow knowledgeable or intelligent, right? It's really your ability to think,
Mhm.
right? And I think that that's kind of like the central thing that we have to focus on. But like, how do you go about doing that? Because one, I don't think that you're going to get the media on board.
No, they're happy with the way it is right now.
Yeah, like they're getting views, right? If you're going to help them get views, that's one thing, right? But if you're going to try to get them to participate in educating people about media literacy and how they can be smarter about how they consume it,
Mhm.
I think that would be a hard pass for them. I think they would be like, this is going to reduce viewers, so no, right?
Mhm.
I hear a lot of people though talk about, oh, I consume all media outlets so that I can get a really well-rounded
Mm.
view, right? And still that's slanted, right? And it's got its own narratives, and you're still missing a lot of pieces. Even if you consume social media around whatever that topic, whatever that thing is, you're still not really getting the full narrative.
No, it's all a socially constructed version of an event. And doesn't
Yeah.
matter which side you're reading it from, you're going to get a biased view of it.
And that's a good point though, bringing up like bias, because even the information that we seek out is influenced by our own biases, right? And we're looking for that confirmation bias, right? To confirm what we already know.
Mhm.
We rarely ever are going out and saying, I want to disprove myself. Like most of the time we're like, this is a fact. Let's go find it. And so that's another issue with like policing perceptions. Like you're already preconceived notions and ideas about law enforcement and policing and, all of those things. You're going to go and find information that confirms that and reinforces it. And you're going to take it as fact. And then anything that's presented to you to the contrary, you're going to refute it. You're going to say, that's distorted. That's
Mhm.
misinformation. That's, inaccurate,
Mhm.
or they edit it. Like you're going to somehow be able to see the full lens, right? When it doesn't confirm what you already believe. But when you consume something that you already believe, you're going to fail to be able to recognize those same things. And that's another hurdle, like with media and social media, is our own individual biases.
Yes, and we get in what's called an echo chamber. especially
Mm.
because the algorithms start feeding us the things that we've already paid attention to. So usually, the people we surround ourselves with have very similar beliefs because we don't like to be challenged too much. And then the algorithm is feeding us more and more. And so that's what they call it, that echo chamber, that I'm just going to keep getting confirmed
Mm.
what I already
Yeah.
believe. So,
Yeah, I've heard the term filter bubble
Hmm.
for that kind of idea. Like it's rooted in like social learning theory, like you're mentioning, right? Is it social learning theory? No, I'm second guessing myself. The birds of the feather flock together.
yes, that's social learning.
Yeah, that's what you were talking about.
I'm sorry. No, I use that as control theory, birds of a feather flock
Oh, you
together.
do?
But yeah.
That's control theory.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
use if you
interesting.
lie down with dogs, you're bound to get fleas for social learning.
Really?
Yes, that's another class.
That is. But it's that idea that
Yeah.
like, the people that we surround ourselves are similar in the ways that we think about
But it
things.
does it reinforces.
It reinforces it. And so like I've never heard echo chamber, but I have
Yeah.
heard filter bubble, where the algorithm is working to filter out all of the things that you're not looking at and then provide you with all kinds of information about what you are,
Yeah. So it's comfortable for you.
Yeah, it's like creating an experience, which I think is really interesting because I always manipulate the algorithms. Like I might look at something and then I go and delete it out of the algorithm's memory because that's not necessarily a
Didn't
belief.
know you could do that.
Yeah, you can manipulate your algorithms in different social media platforms.
Mhm.
Like I know that Google allows it and I do that with Google. But you can manipulate those things. And I'll do that. Like if I click on something that I was kind of intrigued by, but then like it's not something that supports my beliefs or ideas, I'll delete it out of there because I don't want to see that nonsense again. Like, no, or I don't know. But I don't think a lot of people are like necessarily aware that this is happening. I think people get confused. They're like, I was talking about that or I was researching it and now all of a sudden I see all of it. And they're like, how does this happen? I'm like, it's the algorithm.
Sometimes we just talk about it. and
Yeah.
Mhm.
That
Okay,
is
that does happen
listening.
though sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Because it's listening too. And you'll notice, like, I don't know if this happens to you all, but like there's periods of time where I'm like interested in certain things and then I move away from it. And so like I'll be inundated with that content and then like it slowly filters out because I quit searching for it, I quit reading about it, and then it's gone, right? Or there's times where I just talk about something I've never actually searched
Mhm.
for it or looked it up, and then I get advertisements for it, and it's because it's creating that experience for you, and it's trying to cater to you, but it has a lot of flaws. It creates a lot of problems, especially with policing, right? Because if you're going and you're searching like police brutality and racial profiling, and then like you're inundated with all of these things, like you begin to build up this perception that law enforcement are this way or that this is the all of it. And in a prior episode with Chief Holloway, we talked about this idea of these very few isolated incidences that are just going viral all over social media or the media or whatever. And I had him contextualize it. I'm like, these types of events, like what percent, what portion,
Mhm.
and how many calls for service do you actually get in a year, right? And when you think about like, he's like, I can't even give you a number. It's like the millions,
Yeah.
And we're talking about a handful of these significant events that are happening that are painting all law enforcement with the same brush, that this is all of law enforcement, right? But in the grand scheme of things, they're having, millions of citizen contact, right? That are going unadvertised, unnoticed, like we're completely unaware. And so when you contextualize it like that, it really does show you that like these things are not as grandiose as like one individual might be making it. These are definitely challenges and issues facing law enforcement and things that we should pay attention to and work to get better. But we have to contextualize that and understand that this is not all of law enforcement, right?
Right.
This isn't the whole picture. And that's the kind of one of the challenges I think with social media and in the media too,
Mhm.
is they don't always couch their post or report in, there are 5 million calls for service, contacts with civilians a year. We're talking about 1. We're
Well,
talking
that's-
about 10.
That's
We're-
because people want the story. They don't want the number. And they're going to forget the number,
Yeah.
right? They're going to forget. It's like, how many times can we tell even our own students how rare serial killers are?
Oh,
Yet
it's still.
there are so many serial killers
we
out
have to
there.
be afraid of
right?
them.
Like, and that's that same sort of thing with law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
This is the reality.
Mhm.
And then they go and they watch, 10 stories about something the police have done wrong.
Mhm.
What are they going to remember? That one number or those 10
Yeah.
stories, right?
Taking like those small number of incidents and like looking at it in the grand scheme of things, it can just like it just forms people's ideas, and then it can like breed distrust and then make those events more likely to happen because they're
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy
Exactly,
almost. Like
yeah.
I think about that too. Like when individuals already have these negative views about law
Mhm.
enforcement, and then when they're interacting with law enforcement, they're bringing all that with them and that hostility, and which like there is a lot that makes sense, right? It's understandable. But in the same sense that we expect law enforcement to enter every situation as if it were anew and they don't have any prior, right?
Mhm.
We want them to come level-headed and calm, and this is the first thing. Like individuals are bringing all of that, and so they automatically, are heightened or agitated, and
things are more likely to
it's-
escalate.
things are more likely to escalate because now you've got this officer who's you're confronting with abrasiveness or adversarialness, and they're like, like what did I do? And then they become the same way, and it just kind of like is this fulfilling thing, right?
Mhm. And then the media gets another story.
Yep. And then they have another story, and then
Mhm.
everybody's confirmed that, the police are these terrible, horrible things, and we have to defund them and get rid of them, and start anew, right?
I do think it's important though to recognize that some people in some communities that are over policed already have these experiences. And so the media is such a small part of why they might be reacting
Oh,
the way that they're
absolutely, yeah.
reacting.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
also, I think another important consideration is the way media influences each of us in our perceptions, our behavior. All of that is highly dependent on the individual, their characteristics, their experiences. So while we can,
Yeah.
paint it as driving that narrative and being horrible, there are other factors that we definitely have to consider.
And I also think that for communities that are over policed and that have had a lot of negative experiences with law enforcement, social media particularly has been, kind of a godsend to them, right?
Mhm.
Because it has really highlighted all of the things that they've been saying that they've been experiencing and showing the issues and the challenges within law enforcement and the way that they've been policed. And so like it has both the challenges and the
Mhm.
opportunities. And I agree, there is a lot of benefit to having social media be able to highlight those things for those communities. And there's a lot of validity in kind of the nervousness. I think it goes beyond nervousness. It's
Mhm.
not nervousness, it's fear that's behind those interactions. And I agree. Like I think that that's valid and that's important. And I don't think that we necessarily want to argue that, law enforcement are wonderful and perfect and all of those things. We want to recognize kind of the challenges and the issues with social media, but also the opportunities that it brings for those communities. Because for a lot of those victims in those communities, without social media, they wouldn't have gotten, I don't know that I can say that they've gotten justice, but worked towards being able to have their stories heard
Gained
and
awareness.
the awareness being brought to it. And there's even some policy changes that come out of the things that we learn about from social media too, that we don't necessarily hear from media because, as you said, like media's narrative is driven by those official actors like law enforcement
Mhm.
and government officials. And so, they're not going to stand up there and say, yeah, we messed up and, we did this wrong. Most of the time when we hear reports from them, it's skirting around that, right? And social media has really helped to bring accountability,
That's, yeah.
I think. Yeah. It's an accountability. It's also broken down trust, but in some ways it builds up trust when we hear stories like law enforcement doing community-oriented policing things on social media that I don't think you hear in the media really about law enforcement,
Mhm.
playing basketball with the kids in the community. Or, I read a story recently where law enforcement officer adopted um, a child who had been the victim of abuse. And, like that was highlighted on social media, but not on media.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot of opportunities that it brings for certain communities. But there's still a lot of challenges.
And I think it's also, but how prevalent are those things? Because I don't know if that's the right statement, but looking critically at police use of social media, it has a lot of validity in terms of it can help solve cases. There's all this bring
Mm.
awareness, etc. But it's also used from some people's perspectives as what's called propaganda. And that is, there's propaganda, right? And propaganda is to convince us. So the people who write about propaganda would say, well, that story of them playing basketball, that video of them dancing, the people who criticize it say it's being used as propaganda to show us that they are doing good versus just highlighting the bad stuff.
So
But
I've
it goes
never-
back to that balance, though, right? Both
Mhm.
sides of the story. But
yeah, I've never heard of the term propaganda. Is that what it is? Propaganda?
yes. So think about propaganda, but add cop on the front. That's what. So after George Floyd, that term became used more and more as the Black Lives Matter and other people challenged, particularly cop shows, whether they're reality shows or even things like everybody's favorites, Law and Order and Criminal Minds, because they tend to normalize small injustices. And so but they send a message that the cops are doing good, they're being effective, and so that's why they call it propaganda. Like it's almost like a mouthpiece for the police department, even though it's a Hollywood.
It's like a way for
creation.
them to kind of mold the narrative,
Mhm.
right? To tilt it into their way. But you bring up another important thing that I think we have to talk about, and that's like true crime and all of like the cop shows and all of those things and the way that they influence policing and what people think about them. So I know that there's like categories, and this is not my area. I don't know. Like the shows that are of like actual events. Like I'm thinking of like Forensic Files and FBI Files and The First 48. Those are different to me than shows like what is it? Like Law and Order SVU and help me out
Yes.
here. What's another one? CSI. What is it?
Yeah,
CSI.
CSI.
And I don't know.
Yeah, you're talking about a couple very different things.
Yeah, like those are like different types of shows. Like what
Yes.
are those categorized into something?
Yeah, so the shows like Law and Order, SVU, and CSI, NCIS, all of those are broadly called crime dramas because they're fictional
Okay.
or fictionalized. They might take, like
Okay.
Law and Order, when it came out, it was known for taking headlines and then making the show kind of about it, but it's not supposed to be that story, right? And so it's fictional.
Okay.
Every one of those stories is fictional. And my students often confuse these, and I'm always like, I don't understand how that's fictional. That's actors that they're doing this, right? Shows like Forensic Files and things like that, you might put more broadly into sort of a true crime category, and it's a docuseries. We're going to recreate these events and tell you this story. And then there's reality television.
Okay.
And that is the very first one was Cops, came out in 1989. And it was known as giving you a televised ride along with the police. It was
Okay.
unfiltered reality. When that came on, people were obsessed with it because they're like, this is what policing is like, right? But they didn't necessarily consider, just as a side note, that for every minute you see on the show, they've filmed over an hour. and they cut it down, right, to give us 5 minutes of a story where we watch just action happening with police
Right,
officers.
yeah.
There's that fictional, there's more of that true crime where we use some Hollywood to create the narrative, etc. And then there's the reality, like, and now cops now has things like live PD. Right, it's called something else
no,
now.
you're right. Live PD.
But it's
I've
called
seen
something
that.
now because after George Floyd, both cops and live PD went off the air. But by 2022, they were back.
Oh.
But like recreated, and well, cops is
Mhm.
still cops, but live PD I think is called something else.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, and so across those three categories, they all kind of work at really painting distorted views of what law enforcement actually is. I think a lot of students, when they think about police officers and the work that they do, they think of things along the lines of cops and live PD. And when we bring law enforcement officers in, they're like, what do you think the majority of the things that I'm doing are? And students are kind of stunned when it's like, I'm doing paperwork,
Mhm.
right? The
Reports.
majority of the work that they're doing is filling out reports.
Mhm.
Yeah. And they're like, there's like a very small portion. And most of our calls are calm, nonviolent,
Mhm.
you know, not this high speed chase kicking in doors. And I also think that it kind of paints a distorted picture of like investigative work too, because you can see, you know, like with like the first 48 or something like that, you know, this condensed version,
Mhm.
and really like investigative work takes months or
Yeah.
years, or sometimes it never, you know,
Mhm.
like they never solve it.
But
And
the
then,
story's 42 minutes long, so
Yeah.
they have to make that fit in that
yeah,
42
and
minutes.
they, you know, like there's maybe like one little snippet, like 4 months later or 12 years later, you
Yeah.
know, like
Still
here.
awaiting sentencing.
Yeah, for sure. And then, you know, even with like things like CSI and things like that, there's always justice, I find.
Always highly
those-
effective,
Yeah,
like
right?
almost infallible. Like every single case is going to be solved almost.
Yeah, and so it also paints a distorted picture of like the court process,
Mhm.
right? And so I don't think, and I think from our experiences with students, they come in and this is their education about the system, right? And, you know, like we have to really work hard to kind of undo the
Yes.
media's influence on what we know the justice system is, right? But I think that, you know, like that distortion of what justice is, like in reality, I would argue that like justice doesn't really occur, but all of those shows
Yep.
end with
Death
justice.
or conviction
yeah,
or arrest,
And
depending what the
those-
show is.
those
Yeah.
are equated with justice, right? And
yeah.
that also paints our like understanding of what justice should be, right?
Mhm.
And we talk about justice a lot. Like, what is justice, right? And in America, like it's some form of punishment, whether that be death or that be life imprisonment or that be monetary fines, right? That is our, you know, measure of justice. But I think the conversations we have, you ask any victim, and does that, you know, is that justice? But it really does kind of paint a lot of distorted ideas with regard to not just policing, but the justice system as a whole.
Mhm. Yeah, because with police, at least most people have some sort of interaction or have seen police doing their jobs. So they have some idea of the reality. And then you ask them, well, how many of you have ever gone to watch a trial? Which we already know is very rare for trials to even happen. So how many of you watch a trial?
Yeah.
Right. And then there's the, you know, where most of my research is in the prisons, like the prison media connection, because most people are never going to walk into a prison. They're not, you know, I always joke, you can't knock on the door and be like, hey, what's going on in there? Let me in. And so, right, the further we get away, the further we get down that
Yeah.
system, the less personal knowledge we have. But we might have some interactions with law enforcement that can humanize them or highlight the issues in our community, stuff like that, that we can add on to
Mhm.
the media narratives that we have in our head.
That gives me an idea. We didn't talk about like Locked Up and those types of
Mhm.
shows. Like where would those kind of fit in those categories?
They're docu-series about the justice system. So I in my one class, I kind of use reality TV as a sort of an umbrella that's different from true crime. And so I would put things that go with the system as this sort of reality TV / docu-series, where I go more specifically for, and these are my definitions that I use, where the true crime is more about the criminal event itself or the offenders, and you're going to watch that process unfold. There is, of course, overlap, but that's what, just as Cops was a televised ride along, Lockup is a televised tour of a prison in a way, right? They go in there with the cameras and somebody shows them around and tells them who they can talk to and what they can tape, and then they put together that story. I used to know the number of days they filmed for an hour episode of Locked Up, but I can't remember. But it was, I want to say maybe 9-10 hours to get that 42 minutes.
So 90 days in would fit like in reality?
Oh, 60 days in?
Is that what it is?
60
it
I'm not
days?
sure.
It's 60, I think.
60 days in?
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
But in that, it's almost like creating a game show, right? You know the premise behind it?
Isn't it where it's like some random person,
Yeah.
you know, like whatever, stay-at-home mom or ex-military, and they go undercover,
Yeah.
right? And they go into like, I know that Fulton County was a big one
Mhm.
that participated, and they go in for like, 60 days. I thought it was 90, but 60 days.
Yeah.
And then like they like do interviews about their experience and things like
Yeah,
that.
and then they're supposedly investigating what's going on and it's basically
Oh.
snitching, right,
Yeah.
to the sheriff. And it's all kind of under this guise of there's these problems in the jail, and the only way we can figure it out is if we send people undercover,
yeah.
right? And then we watch those people. And
Yeah.
the fascinating for me thing with that is I feel like it's, it is sort of a manipulation, except for that one cool thing is cool. I don't know if it's cool, but you see people become institutionalized. They're like that mom of two is like, all certain way when she walks in, and then all of a sudden she's playing the jail game,
Yeah.
and you're like,
Mm.
so in that way for me, it gives sort of this, I know this is off topic, but it at least it kind of shows the impact, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because since we divide the world into us and them when we talk
Right.
about people who are incarcerated, you take that mom of two going in, we can relate to her,
Right.
right? Or a college student, right? You can relate to the college student. And then we watch them go through this and we're like, oh, like what would happen to me if I
Yeah.
went in there?
Yeah.
So there's that kind of thing. But it's also, it's kind of a trick to put people in there. And I don't know who in the right mind would do it anyway. Like,
Oh, I know. And the thing is like when I've watched some of it, and when I heard about it, I was wondering like, are they getting paid? Like
I don't know, but they might be.
because like I mean I feel like it would have to be a good chunk of
They
change.
probably are.
Yeah, I mean obviously I think that they've got to be getting paid to do the show, but for me like I'm gonna need double, right?
Well,
Plus
extra.
like hazard pay at the
Well,
end.
you're at risk for getting charged.
You're at
somebody
risk for,
attacks
like,
you. Well,
diseases
That as
too.
well. But also, could you imagine you go in there and then like somebody attacks you and you
and then you
fight
get a
back
charge,
and
yeah.
you get a charge and all of a sudden you're actually really
in the justice system. Yeah. Oh, I wonder if there's like
I don't
Uh,
know that that's happened, but
a contract that they sign,
I
like
don't know.
giving them immunity. That
Mm.
would be dangerous. They wouldn't be able to do
Yeah.
that because then
Just do
there
anything.
would be people like me that would feel like I need you to go away from me. And like when they didn't, like there would be, or like if you touch my Oreos, okay, we're gonna have problems.
You're probably not getting Oreos, right?
Like, hey,
Generic.
Right.
Okay.
Hey, duplex might work if I'm in there.
Is that what the brand is? I
Yeah.
couldn't remember the name of the brand.
Duplex cookies. You can get them at Dollar Tree, and they're only $1.25 at Dollar Tree, but not in commissary. They're much more. But yeah, I mean, I wonder if they have like a contract or something. Like
Yeah.
if
Have to look
they're
into that one. And
that would be interesting. But yeah, like all of that, right, kind
Mhm.
of really paints distorted views of the criminal justice system as a whole. And like, I don't know, like besides educating people, like how do we even remedy that?
Well, you also have to look for what is the good stuff, right? With everything bad or mediocre, there's also good stuff out there. And so if people really want to see the other side, there are opportunities. Like there is a podcast called Running from Cops. And they actually did the most extensive analysis of the show Cops that's ever been done. And in that, they start to break down what's actually happening. So I know that's a very specific example, but it kind of shows you like, yeah, this is what you're seeing, but look what's really going on here in this show and how is it representing things. Or there was a shooting. Who was the shoot? Philandro Castile. And there was a podcast that followed the trial and everything that was going on and having legal experts supplementing it and talking about it. I know I'm going to keep using podcasts, but I think that's where sort of the birth was, because it was more of an independent media when it was starting. And it's also a tool for like public radio stations, things like that. Even like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution newspaper, well, they started doing podcasts with their investigative reporters to break down legal issues. And then, of course, I always am talking about prison podcasts and those that are created. But some of that stuff is out there, and I think, and it's not limited podcasts, it's just what I know. And again, it's the accessibility. Although now I think a lot of those podcasts are becoming more, what would be the word? Mainstream, professionalized. Like it'll come from a podcast group, and they have to get the advertising and the things like that. So then I don't know where the creative freedom goes, right? I haven't really explored that, but initially where some of these were doing it, they had a lot more freedom because they didn't have to fit what that station wanted, whether it's entertainment wise or news wise.
It's less just like short, like headline like what you'd see on regular news media, and more just like long form conversations where you like actually get into like the nitty gritty.
It gives you the time to do that if you are a person who wants to listen to it,
So,
or
like-
listen to it at double speed, whatever.
So what you're kind of suggesting is that we need more outlets
Mhm.
that are focused on counter narratives, right? That are giving us the other angles from experts, from people that know about this, what's going on. And so I think that, I like that.
I'd be interested to see. I've never looked into it about, for example, are there podcasts out there that are being created by law enforcement or former law enforcement? What are the messages that they're trying to send about the field? Because, that's what I do with the prisons. I look for those that are created by people who have experienced incarceration. And what are their stories? So I've not ever.
I know that Pinellas
into
County
it.
Sheriff has 56. That's
Okay.
their podcast they put out. I haven't really got to consume a lot of it,
I'm gonna have to
but
check it out.
from a little bit of what I was gathering is they do talk about specific cases that have like already like gone, I think, through the trial process or whatever. Like there's a conclusion because they can talk about it then.
There could be stories out there that are by officers who are doing it independently. I don't know.
Yeah,
But that's what I would
that's
look
the one
for.
I know
Yeah.
about, and so it makes me think that there's probably plenty more. I know that I have seen a little bit on like retired cops that are starting to do things. So that I think that would be
Mhm.
interesting to see if there is already like some of the counter narratives out there. But I agree. I think that we need more like professional counter narrative outlets
Mhm.
that can kind of give that other view. And that's like, I like the idea of like the reaction video kind of idea, where whatever's being put out there, you can respond to that from like a professional lens. So I think that would be interesting to entertain or
And
think
when you
about.
were saying that, though, it just made me think. Just a side note is there's I can't remember what chapter I read this or what book I read. I want to say Aaron Doyle when he talks about cops and its development, and then how after cops became so popular so early on. So we're talking probably 90s that individual police departments tried to make their own version, and he mentioned St. Pete Police in there.
Really?
So I've never, been able to
That's
talk to anyone
Next
or
time we have one, we can ask.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We're gonna ask.
gonna have to ask. But again, it
Yeah.
probably would have been the 90s, but
Yeah.
it would be interesting to hear whether, I mean, it had
Yeah.
to, he had to have known about it, right, to put it in the book. But
Yeah.
it was just mentioned. So
St. Pete Police is mentioned a lot in talking about innovative or new
Mhm.
things, because they're always like, I was researching on like LGBTQ plus liaisons, and St. Pete instituted one like a decade ago. And it's only something that police departments across the US are beginning, like within the
Mhm.
last couple of years. And it was really kind of interesting. I watched a video on their introduction of the LGBTQ plus liaison, and it was Major Marcus Hughes. He was on the podcast a couple episodes ago, but this video was from like the very beginning 10 years ago of when they started this. And so I find a lot of the research that I do, St. Pete is always kind of in the forefront of these innovative ideas and solutions and stuff. And so I thought that'd be interesting. We'll have to ask him.
Was that podcast you were talking about from St. Pete? Was it the 56?
No, that's
County.
Pinellas County
Oh,
Sheriff's.
okay.
Yeah, the Pinellas County. And it's like they have tons of videos. I don't know how long they've been doing
I
it.
meant to look it up that night of baking my bars and I forgot
Yeah.
to. So.
It's been going for a while, but I haven't like been able to listen a lot to it, so I can't really speak to what they're talking about a whole lot, but it would be interesting to see. I bet there's a lot. There's probably a lot. But I think like you mentioned, like long form is I think starting to grow.
Oh, for sure.
Like I think in the beginning people were really attached to the short form with the dopamine release.
Mhm.
Like it is a real thing, like that hit you get just from like consuming that in short small quantities in quick succession. But I think that people are finding value in long form also, and I think it's being utilized a lot more and more.
Well, and they should, capitalize on the popularity of true crime. Like, even though it's not true crime, you could feed that to your true crime audience. And if you do it as a narrative where it has a beginning, middle, and end, and people are going to be engaged, like I don't want to use the word manipulation, but there's ways.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's
For
what
sure.
Cops was all about, right? We're showing
Yeah.
you the raw reality, but we're doing it in a way that's going to entertain you. Well, we could do the same with
Yeah.
these long form stories that
Yeah.
get a little deeper into the issues.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think marketing is the word.
Yes.
Marketing.
Well, no, also manipulation.
But marketing is manipulation, is it not? I mean, show me a picture of food and I'm like, okay, I need to make this or eat this in some way. Like you, in a sense,
Okay.
you marketed to me, but you also manipulated me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that those are kind of one the same. We're going to market it to you in such a way that you participate voluntarily, even though it's not voluntary. So I there's a lot of benefits to media. There's a lot of benefits to social media, but comes with it are the challenges, right? And I think that largely that's kind of what we've kind of concluded is while there's a lot of things that we might dislike about it, we have to kind of pull the good from it
Mhm.
and use that to create value and meaning to whatever the topic is. Today, we're talking about policing. And so I think that that's kind of the summation is, it brings the stories together, the pieces together. And as with any story, we have to plug in some of the details. And that's where we have to like work on engaging with ourselves to grow our thinking about those things and really being able to pull together out of that what is the good that we can learn and what can we leave there and pull forward. So thank y'all for joining me today. This is The Beat. This is the podcast where we talk about building equity, accountability, and trust with law enforcement.